Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, with a review of Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. And despite its title, to my great disappointment, the film is not about King Kong and Godzilla dating. God damn it! Also, this film is one of two movies that came out in the same month with Empire in its name, but just putting the word Empire in your title isn't gonna automatically make your movie The Empire Strikes Back of its series, especially when your Empire movie doesn't really have an empire in it.
Kong.
I know Empire is a cool sounding word, but you really gotta earn using it. You can't just throw it around. It's gonna end up losing all of its meaning. With that said though, does Godzilla X Kong manage to be the Empire Strikes Back of its franchise? Of course not, but you know, I guess it's something to watch until Godzilla -1 comes out in home video. Man, I really should have saw that movie in theaters. Fuck, I really missed out. Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire is the latest entry in Warner Bros.' MonsterVerse franchise, an American take on Toho's iconic Godzilla series of kaiju movies, giant monster films, with the American icon King Kong also having a prominent role within the MonsterVerse. These two giant monsters have had a cinematic rivalry that's almost as old as Godzilla himself, whose third movie was a crossover flick with the Big Ape in King Kong vs. Godzilla, and they most recently came to blows again within the MonsterVerse canon in Godzilla vs. Kong. They switched things up with the title. Now, I like Godzilla, but pairing him up with Kong always felt like a forced gimmick. Their films are two very different approaches to a giant monster movie, and to make it so they can even fight, you have to make Kong so much more massive than he originally was, which kinda changes Kong's vibe completely. I like the classic kaiju films, but I never got hardcore into them, and after a recent rewatch of the original King Kong, I realized why that movie, the Peter Jackson remake of it, and the Jurassic Park movies appealed to me more.
What do they got in there, King Kong?
They deal with monsters that are big, but aren't big to the point where the human characters are totally inconsequential to them. You can have King Kong pick a guy up and bite his head off. You can have an entire T-Rex in frame terrorizing the human characters and still be able to see the humans in frame. With Godzilla, humans are the size of fleas to him. They have to react to him in separate shots. It's cool seeing Godzilla knock over buildings and fight other monsters, but it just personally never appealed to me in the same visceral way more reasonably sized giant monsters appeal to me. Also, the Kong and Jurassic Park movies have that adventure element where they're more about the human characters surviving prehistoric creatures actively going out of their way to try to eat them. So the human story can generally be more engaging than humans surviving a giant monster's general rampage across a city. You mean nothing to Godzilla. It's very impersonal if he crushes you to death, but to a T-Rex, you're at least a meal and a thrill to kill. So there's just more tension for me in knowing a monster is out to kill me specifically, instead of me just avoiding the random destruction the monster causes. The random destruction of kaiju is a symbolic representation of the atomic destruction brought upon Japan during World War II, so not taking away anything from kaiju films, of course, just articulating why I prefer something like Kong or dinosaurs and how they're different from kaiju films. But I do know people will still get mad at me anyway, because of course they will.
They are teaming up?
That won't be enough.
Back to the film at hand though, Godzilla X Kong takes place in the aftermath of Godzilla vs. Kong, which told the story of Godzilla and Kong fighting occasionally, with the main plot being Millie Bobby Brown doing some stuff, I don't know. Mechagodzilla was there too, I guess. What matters is that Kong and Godzilla call a truce in the end as Kong returns to his ancestral home down in the underground world of Hollow Earth, which is a thing too, I guess. Godzilla X Kong follows a similarly bafflingly incomprehensible plot comprised of 3 separate stories that eventually intersect. After Kong has a toothache, he gets lonely, journeys deeper into Hollow Earth, and discovers the subterranean realm, and eventually finds a race of giant apes led by a desperate ruler who looks like Orangutan from the Venture Brothers.
Look at the way you quake in fear.
Kong's plotline basically feels like Adam Wingard played the new God of War games and said, let's just make King Kong that, as Kong is given a tiny ape sidekick that looks like Diddy Kong without the sporty hat.
Is that a mini Kong?
I gotta mention that King Kong looks more like the Sasquatch in these new movies to me than he does a giant gorilla, and they give him an axe and a robot arm, and he can communicate with sign language. At this point, King Kong is basically just a really big dude who doesn't wear pants. Godzilla also has his own storyline in the movie where he, does stuff. Okay, despite Godzilla having top billing in this film, he's barely in it. He fights a couple monsters for a few minutes, and then he helps in the final act. It hardly feels like this could be classified as a crossover film. Godzilla's at most just a guest star. Godzilla appears so infrequently in this film, I forget he exists. Then when a scene comes up with Godzilla in it, I say, Godzilla's in this movie?! This is ultimately a Kong movie through and through, but I guess they didn't want to risk Godzilla fans not showing up, even though they've long established in these MonsterVerse movies that Godzilla is going to very rarely show up. They show Godzilla taking a nap twice in Godzilla X Kong. Warner Brothers has no fucking clue what to do with this character. I'm just gonna say, I'm not really into King Kong and Godzilla being good guys, or at least anti-heroes. I've always preferred them as bad guys, but I guess you can't really build a monster universe around bad guys. Hasn't been done successfully, I suppose. They even tried to make the Dark Universe's villains into good guys, and it still did not fucking work. They couldn't get Movie 2 off the ground.
Kong can't stop this on his own.
The main story of Godzilla X Kong is ultimately the human narrative, and like usual, it's the least interesting aspect of the film despite having most of the runtime dedicated to it. The human narrative involves a journey down into the Hollow Earth by Dr. Eileen Andrews, her adopted daughter Gia, conspiracy podcaster Bernie, and a monster doctor named Trapper, who seems to just be the character Trapper John from MASH.
It's a bit rough and ready, but it should hold.
It's good. It looks good, Trapper.
It's like if I created a Godzilla character.
Then give me at least one nurse who knows how to work in close without getting her tits in my way.
That's a call for war.
The humans journey down to the Hollow Earth because they detect weird shit is going on down there, I guess, and they end up discovering a splinter of Gia's Lost Skull Island tribe, and it kinda looks like a shittier version of Atlantis, the Lost Empire.
He won't be alone.
The human story sucks ass because it's not the adventure it really should have been. It's not like a fun Skull Island adventure where they encounter a ton of monsters that try to eat them. No! One guy just gets eaten by a tree super quick, and that's the only named human character that dies in this film. There's just no sense of danger or threat in the Hollow Earth. We're mostly just told it's a dangerous place, and most of the movie's runtime is spent on the human characters, and they're just not interesting. A lot of the dialogue in the film is made up of techno-babble or dramatic shit you can cut into a trailer like, Kong is humanity's one true hope of survival. Then I hope you're right, Doctor, because if you're not, then we're already extinct.
This world has more secrets than we could possibly imagine.
It's all just total bullshit. I don't care about any of this. The characters we're forced to spend most of our time with aren't interesting, and the cast of these movies has been whittled down over time to total nobodies. They spend so much time on the human characters instead of the real stars, but they can't even at least get stars in the human roles anymore. They could afford Bryan Cranston for 10 minutes, and it's been downhill ever since.
My wife died here!
They can't even afford Millie Bobby Brown anymore. These big blockbuster films have just gotten so expensive that they try to cut obvious corners by padding them out with boring, inexpensive scenes like characters just speculating on what the giant monsters are up to instead of showing the giant monsters actually doing cool stuff. These MonsterVerse movies feel like somebody made a tasty steak for you, but every time you take a bite of the steak, you have to eat an entire bowl of shit. That's a lot of shit you have to eat before you can eat some steak.
He consumes a ton of bleach.
He drinks bleach.
A lot of hardcore fans who defend the MonsterVerse flicks say they don't watch these movies for the human characters anyway, so it doesn't matter if they're lame. But the reality is that most of the movies are spent on the human characters, and you'd hope they'd be interesting if we have to spend so much time with them, but they're just so fucking boring. Based on screen time, a more accurate title for this film would be Dr. Andrews and Kong, Adventures in Hollow Earth.
Godzilla won't come down here unless Kong brings him.
When the film does finally get to scenes of the monsters, it can be pretty fun though. But when it's just Kong hanging out with his fellow Kongs, it does start to feel like I'm watching a shitty knockoff of Planet of the Apes. This movie's CGI is pretty good, but when it's just the apes, it really makes me miss Andy Serkis's ape performances and Weta Digital. Those guys really knew how to make CGI monkeys. When Godzilla X Kong ramps up in the last act, the final action set pieces are really cool, but by that point, the action was so few and far between, so brief, I was too checked out to really appreciate this film's final moments. It kind of feels like a lot of these big franchises now don't really have much incentive to actually try anymore, despite costing so much money. This movie could have just been King Kong and Godzilla watching paint dry for 2 hours, and people would still love it with all their hearts. I give Godzilla X Kong a Dr. Andrews out of Trapper John. They really need to shrink these giant monsters down. They're getting way too fucking big.
Kong can't stop this on his own.
He won't be alone.
Before I go, I want to give a shout out to this video's sponsor, me! Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested, and I thank you in advance. If you liked this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. I'd also like to thank these fine folks pledged my shout-out tier on Patreon for all their kind support. Videos like this wouldn't be possible without all their help. Thank you for watching, see you next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.